Hello, this is a recording for Singapore Math Live Primary Math 2. This is an introductory recording for Primary Math 2 and also the class recording for week 1 of this course. The first thing I'd like to do is take just a few minutes and introduce myself to you. To start with, I'll tell you my name is Brenda Barnett and I am a homeschool mom. I've homeschooled for 15 years at the time of making this recording. My youngest child is currently a 6th grader, and so I'm still got some time ahead of me in the homeschool world. But I have, with my 4 children, I've gone through primary 1 through primary 6 4 times through, and so I'm very well versed in this curriculum. And in 2015, I was licensed by Singapore Math to support home educators because of my experience. Also, my experience before homeschooling was that I have a Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from the University of Oklahoma, and I taught high school in Texas for about 7 years before I stayed home before I had a child and stayed home. And so I have a lot of math background, but my perspective of it is that although I did math really, really well, I did not understand, I did not think mathematically until I was teaching with Singapore Math with my son in his 2nd and 3rd grade year. I began to realize that Singapore Math teaches students to think mathematically. Some people naturally think the way Singapore Math teaches, but I think we traditionally have done a disservice to students because we've allowed them to think that way if they were natural thinkers that way, but we've not taught them to think mathematically. And as we go through the curriculum, you'll see how I mean that, and I'll point it out to you when we do that. But I began to understand that we can teach students to think mathematically. And so having done that 4 times with my 4 kids, they're very different abilities, different giftedness, and they are all 4 extremely strong mathematically. And I believe it's because I taught them with this curriculum. The other thing I want you to know about me and about Singapore Math is that we offer these 3 things. I think that I offer you in Primary Math 2 the modeling and the terminology to go along with the book and the way that it teaches. As I said, it teaches differently than I learned, and so how to model that for your students, how to teach it, what words to use are all very important things that I can help you with. I can also give you the perspective, not just math, but even homeschooling. Having gone through it several times, I have a little different perspective. I would probably do it differently if I started over with my first child in our first year of primary math. And so I have some perspective to offer you with that. And then I also have some long-term implications of the curriculum. When we're doing something now, I can look at it and say, I know why we're teaching that now. And whereas maybe with my first child, I'd be tempted to skip it or make light of it or do it differently. Now I say, okay, I know why we're teaching it this way, and I can show you the long-term implications of it. So Primary Math 2 is not a difficult curriculum, but I think that I would be able to offer you a lot to help you out with that. And so that's who I am and why I'm doing these recordings for you. I do want you to know about Primary Math 2 that it is not hard. And yet I do think that there's some value that I have to offer and that it's a good thing for you to work with these books. I think that it isn't hard, but it is rigorous for the challenging, it is rigorous for the Primary Math 2 age, and it gives you plenty of rigorous things to do. And I would not, when I say it's not hard, I still want you to have confidence in the material because it is going to get your child to the point where they need to be, and it's going to get them to a very solid place of mathematic education and excellence. And so have confidence in it. Even if it feels like you're not doing enough, you really are doing enough. So don't worry about that. And the other thing I would say to you, it's a long way from now for your child in Primary 2, but Primary Math 6, if that's completed in 6th grade and your student goes from there to a pre-algebra classroom and then does Algebra 1 after that, and by classroom I don't necessarily mean in a school. There are lots of ways to homeschool with pre-algebra and above. But Primary Math 6 and 6th grade could be moved on to 7th grade pre-algebra and 8th grade Algebra 1, which is considered an advanced math track in American schools. If your student, either if you're starting late, or if your student goes slower, or if you have an advanced student, it is also very possible to go straight from Primary Math 6 into Algebra 1, and that is a possibility. We'll talk about how to do that more in the Primary Math 6 support. And so, but I want you to know that you can do that, and you can make that leap if your child is ready, and with certain little bit of a modification we can do that. And so don't feel like you have to rush through things just to get through, you know, oh, this isn't hard enough, I need to rush. You really don't have to rush. And so Primary Math 6 as a 6th grader is plenty, and you can get to an advanced math track just by being there. So don't feel like you need to rush through Primary Math 2. Let's talk, that's kind of all I really need to tell you for an introduction. Let's talk about the class recording for week 1. And before I talk about the class recording, some other things I want to make sure I said. I do hope that as part of this course you will print the syllabus that I have listed for you, and that each week you will work really hard to complete the syllabus. I think it is helpful for our complete the assignments on the syllabus. I think it's helpful for our students. Some of them need to know that there's a beginning and an end to school, and if you work really hard and get through the entire syllabus and that work early in the week, you might have some extra time to do other things that are worth doing but are not necessarily math related. On the other hand, if you have a harder time with it, you've got all week to do it, but we're going to stick with it till we're finished. I think excellence in education starts even young, to realize that there's a set amount we do, and we're going to get that amount done. And sometimes it's easier than others, some weeks will be shorter than others, but work really hard and show your students that there's an assignment for the week, and this is what we're going to get done. I don't know what day you go to the zoo or grandma's house or the park or have a dentist appointment, but you can take care of those things and fit the assignments in around all of your other obligations. The second thing I would like to encourage you to do is each week to watch the class recording. Some weeks will be very short. This is a little longer because of the introductory material, but each week commit to watching that, because there are things that I will say in the area of perspective or the long-term idea of what I have of what's important. There are things that I will help you with, and modeling all those things will be there, and they're important, and I don't want you to get weeks and weeks down the road doing it best you can and then realize that something that I said earlier made things much easier, much better, much more helpful. But then the third thing of all of that is, of course, as a homeschool parent, you're going to have to be flexible. If you're going to homeschool for the long haul, flexibility is key and important and required, and so make sure you include flexibility into the middle of this. I'm giving you suggestions for assignments, I'm giving you great ideas, but if you went back and looked, not every book every year was completely filled in my students either, and there are times when we had to modify a little bit because life requires flexibility. So this week, in your class recording, you'll see that we are doing the workbook, exercises 1 through 5, the intensive practice book, page 1 through 7, and this week, the challenging word problems book, there is nothing assigned. And so a class recording each week will include, the class recording includes conversations about the workbook and the intensive practice. There's a lot of acronyms going on here. The solutions recordings on the website, I will sometimes put a recording that's called IP, and that's intensive practice, and that would be for the word problems. Now, I believe certainly this week we don't have any word problems. I think in our first section, I'm looking now, in our first section we don't. But in other sections, what you'll find is that in the intensive practice book, it'll do some pages of practice, and then, like, look on page 23, in the intensive practice book it says word problems. And so generally those word problems are worked out in detail on the recording that's titled IP. The challenging word problems, CWP, are all worked out in detail on a recording labeled CWP. So the class recording is what you watch every week, beginning to end, and then the intensive practice and the challenging word problems recordings are what you watch when you get stuck. And I say when you get stuck, not if you get stuck. We all get stuck in word problems. Now, it may not happen in Primary Math 2. It may. We'll see how, I haven't done all these recordings yet. As I go through them, we'll see how it works out, if I need to work everything cover to cover, if I just give you a good idea of how to demonstrate for your students. And that's why primary 1 and 2 are priced differently than the rest, because the material that I'll be required to show will be significantly different than in the other classes. But I still want to absolutely give you a demonstration of how to do things. But as I go through the class recording each week, that's what I hope you watch each week. Because it will give you the information you need to present all of this. So let's talk about the workbook for week 1. These 5 exercises in the workbook, because this week we are doing exercises 1 through 5, these 5 exercises in the workbook really camp out on some things that are very, very important. Place value, meaning really understanding that a number like 345 is made up of 3 hundreds and 4 tens and 5 ones. That is very foundational to Singapore math and to thinking mathematically. So make sure that they're paying really good attention to place value. Words and phrases, like even on page 7, when they're looking at words and phrases, 30 and 7 make 37. 7 more than 30 is 37. 30 plus 7 is 37. Those are different way we say it and different phrases we use to indicate it. They need to really read that and pay attention and make sure they understand the way things are phrased. If they look at those and say, first one's 37, so they all are. First one's 58, so they all are, and they don't read those, then they're going to miss out on something. So slow them down a little bit on page 7 and make sure they read those phrases and that they understand what things mean. When I talk about place value, of course, on page 8, all of those are there. Place value is throughout the entire thing. I think the thinking skills, when I talk about thinking skills, I'm looking at page 10. And certainly when we're comparing numbers on page 14, just it all kind of fits together, right? The thinking skills, when you're doing 1 more, 1 less, 10 more, 10 less, that's thinking skills, that's place value, that's words and phrases, all of that part on exercise 2. Exercise 2 should hurt their brain a little bit to think about how things work. It'll force them to think. It will force them to think in place values. It will force them to read and pay attention to words. All of those things they'll be better mathematicians for having done that on number 10 in words and page 11 in writing. All of those things are good. I keep saying, especially in these early grades, I had a very, very reluctant writer, and so I'm not kidding. On page 9, that little writing portion was an entire day. All we had to do 1 whole day in math were to write those 6 words out, because that would be about all that little one could have done in 1 day. Writing was really, really frustrating for that one in my house, and so so it's okay to break it down based on your student and what your student requires. But this is all very foundational to Singapore math and the way we think about things. On page 14, it does have the greater than and the less than. It's okay to think in terms of, you'll know that I'm not an artist when you see this, it's okay to think in terms of the alligator eating the largest number. When we have the sign that looks like this, the alligator is open-mouthed going towards that largest number. So when we say compare 5 and 3, the alligator is going to eat the 5. When you compare 1 and 7, the alligator is going to eat the 7. It's okay to give them those kind of mnemonic devices to help them remember what's going on, but those numbers you're looking for, and of course the equals, I don't think we go to equal in this one. It's either larger or greater than or less than, but that little bitty mnemonic device might be helpful to some of your students, and that's certainly a fine way to apply a memory device. Moving on to the intensive practice book, where we're doing pages 1 through 7. Again, none of this is going to be hard for you to know what you're supposed to do, or hard for your students to do it. Just some things to think about, and it'll be brought up later, but it would be great for your student, even on page 1, when you have 2 hundreds and 0 tens and 6 ones, and you make that number into 206. It's an interesting thing even then as I write and talk, sometimes I make a mess out of things, to realize that 200s could also be seen as 20 tens, and that this number could also be seen as 20 tens and 6 ones. And that when we write this number, a 0 is in the tens place, or you could say a 20 is in the tens place. So there are 0 tens, there are also 20 tens. And many times when we work on place value, the fact that there are 20 tens is going to be something we use a lot later on. Again, you see on page 2 and page 3 that we camp out on words and we work on changing numbers into words and words into numerals. And again, that can be frustrating, but I think on page 3, especially reading them carefully, making sure that they can read really carefully, or listen if they're not reading yet and you choose to continue on with it and not let their reading hold up their math, you can read this to them. But when you read it, they need to be able to listen and recognize the numbers and what they mean. And then when you get on to the number bonds on number 4, the number bonds are super important in math to be able to recognize that 756 is made up of 700 and 56. They didn't ask it this way, but there are also 70 tens and 6 ones. There are also 700 and 5 tens and 6 ones. There are a lot of ways to see that. Follow along with what the book is asking and do whatever they're showing you in the problem, but there are lots of those to consider. Again, this is not hard for you. You know exactly what you're doing, but on page 5, when they give you a picture, and on part A, you're given a tree with these numbers in it, you're asked to circle the biggest number and cross out the smallest number. What we hope our students realize is that it doesn't matter about the rest of the number. If I have 500s and 100 and 200 and 300, I know for sure that the biggest number is 502 and the smallest number is 119. You don't have to pay attention to anything else because the hundreds is the only thing that matters on that one. And in these problems, because we're in primary 2, we don't ever even go past the hundreds place. We're just looking at things and realizing, in other words, there's not 2 500s that you have to go past that. Now on the second one, you do have the fact that you have a 49 and a 425, and so when you're comparing these and you look at the hundreds place, realizing that you have 800 and 700 and 400 and 0 is important, because the 425 and the 49 don't compare just because the first number is 4. In the hundreds place, the biggest number is the 800 number and the smallest number is the 0 number. So those kinds of things can be drawn out with discussion and just a quick conversation. The rest of intensive practice is all more of the same. It's really, really good to help our students to just stop and focus and think about numbers and the words and what it all means. So check the answers in the back. If your student is missing things, they might need to slow down and read more carefully and be more methodical. Do your very best to go over it every day and check their answers and not let them get a week's worth of mistakes before you go back and correct it. But you can look at those over pretty quickly and find them and grade them. They're not hard to do, but you just want to make sure your student starts out in their math career being methodical and going as slow as they need to get the right answers. That's all I have for you for week 1 in the class recording, and that's all. Thank you.